I'm going to preach about preaching. Now, normally, I hate to do this because it doesn't matter to any of you how I came to write a particular sermon. You just want to hear it. However, this week has been, shall we say, unique. I've walked around this past week with the same question in my head that I'm sure many of you have been asking. Will it be Trump or will it be Biden? And let's be honest, one outcome requires a sermon of celebration and a new vision of America going forward, while the other would have to be the most pastoral sermon I could muster while still dealing with my own disappointment. For most of the week, we existed in this kind of limbo of neither person having won. We were living in this kind of betwixt and between state, between the potential and the actual, both and either, one way or the other. You might be familiar with the well-known thought experiment devised by Erwin Schrodinger, the quantum physicist. He proposed a scenario in which a cat was kept in a box with a vial of poison, and whether or not the poison was open depended on the uncertainty of quantum decay. According to one theory of quantum mechanics, that meant that until one opened the box to check, the cat was both alive and dead at the same time. This is referred to as Schrodinger's cat. On social media this past week, my colleagues and I were bemoaning our lot in life, having to write sermons without knowing the outcome of the election. And I joked on one of my friend's Facebook posts that we're all writing Schrodinger's sermon, living in a state of both and neither. Yet that's not the only paradox that we have to struggle with. In many ways, the outcome of the election presents us with another spiritual tension, namely this. Do we work to change the world according to our wishes and desires, or do we learn to accept life as it is and let go of suffering? Do we bless or curse the world? Do we work to change it, or do we accept what is? Now, different religions and spiritual thinkers have had different takes on this paradox. For example, the Christian theologian Reinhold Niebuhr once wrote one of the most famous prayers, arguably the most famous prayer of all time, recited in 12-step programs every single day. It is commonly known as the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That encapsulates both sides of the paradox pretty well. There's another saying in Islam that gets to it too. Trust in Allah, but tie your camel to a post. Have faith, but don't be reckless or stupid. Even faith has an active element to it. Now, this morning, I've chosen two representatives from each side of this paradox. First, let me start with easily one of the greatest Zen masters of all time, Hakuin. Hakuin lived in Japan in the 17th and 18th centuries. He revived the Rinzai school of Zen, one of the two major branches, and emphasized the use of koans, or paradoxical riddles. He would have loved Schrodinger's cat experiment. Anything to defy logic and embrace our inner wisdom. Our reading today is probably the most famous story about Hakuin. He is living near a village, minding his own business, when an angry family drops a baby on his doorstep. Not accustomed to children around, he raises it anyway. All he says is that so? Hakuin is an accept whatever comes up kind of guy. He has Niebuhr's serenity in spades. Oh, you're turning over my whole world by dropping off a kid whom I know is not mine. Okay, that's what we're rolling with today. That's what life is presenting to me. Let's go. Is that so? He doesn't hire a lawyer or go to the Maury Povich show to take a paternity test to get out of it. He accepts life as it is and therefore experiences no suffering. Enlightenment is like that. In a lot of ways, it's a very strange experience looking at it from the outside. One Zen teacher, the late Charlotte Joko Beck, once proposed a thought experiment of her own. She said, imagine that you are in a terrible car accident in which you lose both arms and both legs. If you were a fully enlightened Buddha, you would not have a problem with this. You would not be attached, literally or spiritually, to your own limbs. You would know, understand, and live impermanence so well that you could progress through all 5 stages of grief almost instantly to arrive at the stage of acceptance. Now, I actually worked as a chaplain in a hospital in Detroit as part of my ministry training and was assigned to the unit that dealt with amputations. No one can simply deal with it that easy. That is a spiritually Herculean feat. And while that's an extreme example, it makes the point of how we deal with pain and suffering and stress and anxiety. Researchers studying stress hormones in gorillas made an interesting observation. Gorillas have complex social systems like humans do, and are often arranged into hierarchies. So the gorillas at the bottom of the social hierarchy, the ones who are the least dominant, responded the poorest to stress. As the experiment went on, it became clear that the gorillas who were at the top, who had the power to enact change and respond to a stressful environment, had fewer genetic problems related to stress. Those at the bottom, the gorillas who were affected by the outcomes of a situation but had no power to change that situation, were highly susceptible to stress. When we're challenged by life, be it an uncertain election, a divorce, a job loss, and generally not knowing where we are going but care desperately about the outcome, then we experience stress. When we don't have the ability to affect change directly, we're susceptible to heart disease, weight gain, and other health problems. For most of this past week, we have been a band of apes who need to chill out. Now, that said, stress does have its uses. Those at the top of the hierarchy have the privilege and power to affect change. For them, stress is a motivator that focuses attention on the important matter at hand. Stress can be a get or done emotion if you have the tools and the skills and the ability to change things according to your vision of how the world should be. Nothing productive ever got done simply by waiting around for it to happen. It happens through our hands or it doesn't happen at all. This more active end of the paradox is the courage to change the things you can. Admittedly, this is not often the path of the Zen masters. Instead, our representative of this poll is Bluto from Animal House. When faced with the impossible, getting kicked out of the school by the dean, they didn't react not with, "Is that so?" They have no power in this situation. They are the gorillas on the lowest rung of the hierarchy. It's over. They've lost. You can see it in their faces in the beginning of the clip. They're done. That is until Bluto asks one simple question. Did we give up when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor? I think it's safe to say that the answer to that question is resounding no, we did not. He then goes on to articulate a position that I'll label the spirit of Delta House. When faced with impossible odds, do you give up or do you keep fighting? At first, everyone tells Bluto he's dumb. He doesn't understand their situation. But he understands it perfectly. He reminds them of who they are, of how they have been forever. Will it be the worst night of our lives or the best night of our lives? And finally, the leader of Delta House says, Bluto's crazy, but he's right. What we need is a futile and stupid gesture. A futile and stupid gesture. How many times have we seen that in the past 4 years? How many times have you been a part of one of those futile and stupid gestures? Did you really think Kavanaugh would be denied the bench? Or that wearing a pink kitty hat to a demonstration changed anyone's mind? And impeachment, talk about futile and stupid. No one believed that a Republican-led Senate would throw out a president of their own party, did they? None of those things made rational sense at the time. Probably few people believed that substantive change would be seen that day, that year, maybe even that lifetime. But they needed to be done. Sometime, go check out Nancy Pelosi's press conference following the Senate's acquittal of the president after the impeachment. It is great. She has a far more accurate understanding of American history than Bluto and Animal House. But her anger, her passion, her love are as on display as his was in that speech. She shows you the spirit of Delta House that says nothing is over until we decide it is. She says, in fact, emphatically, he is impeached forever. You just can't let a president roll over every American tradition and law without somebody eventually standing up and saying enough is enough, even if the only thing you can do is a futile and stupid gesture. At some point, you have to recognize that history and our children are watching. And if we're to teach our children about how to respond to the flagrant disregard for American values shown by our president, then we have to say something, even if it doesn't make a substantial difference. Now, unfortunately, the active part of this spiritual paradox that urges us to act no matter the odds leads us to some negative places. It can lead to burnout, for one. It can lead to compassion fatigue or cynicism, both of which end up halting action. It can also lead to being maybe overly satisfied with empty gestures and overlook other ways of enacting change that could be more effective. I saw this in community organizing, where it was easier and frankly more fun to have a rally than it was to actually sit down and talk to people who could make a real difference. And as Zen Master Hakuin might point out to us, it does lead to suffering. Inevitably, the world will not conform to our desires and wishes for it to be otherwise. This is the cause of suffering, the second of the Buddha's Four Noble Truths. And I hardly need to explain this to any of you. If you were up past midnight last Tuesday, you could preach to me on what it feels like to live in that space between the world as we want it and the world as it is. Well, how do we navigate these waters? How do we have the serenity to accept the things we cannot change and the courage to make the difference in those ways that we can? Well, according to Niebuhr's prayer, all that leaves us is the courage to know the difference. I think our own Rebecca Parker points to an interesting way through this paradox in our meditation this morning. She writes, "There is an embrace of kindness that encompasses all life, even yours. And while there is injustice, anesthetization, or evil, there moves a holy disturbance, a benevolent rage, a revolutionary love, protesting, urging, insisting. That which is sacred will not be defiled. Those who bless the world live their life as a gesture of thanks for this beauty and this rage." I think Parker gives us a way forward to take the best of both sides of this paradox and move forward as Unitarian Universalists, to practice a benevolent rage, to be thankful for rage, but also beauty, to make a holy disturbance. That's reminiscent of Representative John Lewis's encouragement to get into good trouble. We need to follow that revolutionary love that will not let the sacred be defiled. That, to me, is what living our Unitarian Universalist faith out in the world means. To stand unafraid in the midst of this paradox, this Schrodinger's cat of a presidential election, and be willing to be at peace and fight like crazy for a better world all at the same time. Another appreciator of this spiritual paradox was the writer and humorist E.B. White of Charlotte's Web fame. He famously once said, "I get up every morning determined to both change the world and to have one hell of a good time. Sometimes this makes planning my day difficult." That is perhaps truer now that we know the winner of the election. For while the political reality of a winner is known, the rift in America remains to be healed. In many ways, it feels like we're in the opposite place of where we were after the results of the 2016 election. For the winners, accepting reality as it is pretty sweet. Nevada and Pennsylvania come through for Biden? Is that so, we say, doing our best impersonation of Hakuin. While on the other side, a crazy and chaotic campaign and candidate sounds like John Belushi is running it. Are we giving up just because we lost? No way. We'll fight with lawsuits and false accusations. I think one could safely caption most of what Donald Trump has said and done since Tuesday as a stupid and futile gesture. These two poles of this spiritual paradox play out right before our eyes. And so too does Rebecca Parker's exhortation to us to be the benevolent rage that both loves and demands change. Do not fool yourself into thinking that just because a particular set of candidates won that the work is over. Democracy requires us to be vigilant at all times. Biden and Harris, like all politicians, have to be held accountable to the issues we care deeply about, that reflect our values. We cannot just check out because we voted. Because the work of healing the nation is too important to do. Whatever else happens, healing the divide needs to be happening all along the way. I'm not saying that we should tolerate hate and falsehoods that we encounter, simply that the reason that Russia and other nations want to interfere in our elections is that they know, way better than we do, frankly, that intense division makes us weak. Division that is so absolute, based on hatred of the other side, leads us susceptible to denying reality and therefore makes us easy to beat. Celebration in this moment is great. However, revenge from the left onto the right is contrary to the benevolence that holy disturbance demands from us. Healing is our theme for the month of November, after all. Let us learn to accept reality as it is and be gracious with those who are struggling to do so. May we not let up in our pursuit of constantly demanding change and improvement in our nation and in ourselves. And grant us the wisdom to know that one does not happen without the other. As Rebecca Parker reminds us, none of us alone can save the world. Together, that is another possibility waiting. I love you. Go in peace. Amen. I invite you now